Thank you for making time and joining us. Just as a disclaimer, as we do for every Dr. NAACLS, we are recording this on January 19th, 2022. And the reason we like to timestamp these is that we make them available on the NAACLS blog and our YouTube page. And since we undoubtedly will start having discussions about standard compliance, those standard compliance issues can change from year to year. So just a reminder, if you're watching this in the far distant future, please double check the current documents on the website or contact NAACLS staff to see what the compliance issues or any other processes are. Today's team to discuss our topic, which is innovation and kind of some interesting developments and trends we noticed from our innovation question on the annual survey of programs, is the NAACLS Vice President, Marisa. Marisa, do you want to say anything about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a program director for a hospital-based program in North Kansas City, Missouri. So go Chiefs. And so I have up to 8 students. Right now I have 1 class and about 47-week program. So just to give you a little background of where I'm coming from, we have about 13 university affiliates that we get our students from, and we also take students who already have their bachelor's degree as well.
Thanks, Marisa. Also joining us is the NAACLS CEO, Dr. Dianne Cearlock.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I've been CEO for NAACLS for almost 16 years, and prior to that, former program director of an MLS program.
And then rounding out the rest of staff, Michelle Gianosa. She works with MLS programs. She's also the RCAP liaison, the board liaison, among other responsibilities. And my name is Mark Spence. I work with phlebotomy programs, clinical assistant programs, DCLS programs, among other things. So as I mentioned, that today we will be looking at some interesting developments from our innovation question on the NAACLS news. Previously, we've just kind of used this question internally just to kind of be aware of what innovative and interesting things our programs were doing. And we didn't really utilize those answers for content opportunities. So it's really exciting we're doing that today. Just to let everybody here know, when we were developing this presentation, we didn't necessarily focus too much on the variety of creative methods that programs were using, different delivery methods. We do plan on using some content gathered from the annual survey programs for NAACLS news articles and maybe videos down the road. But today isn't necessarily about delivery methods. It's about other items that we found of interest and thought that would be beneficial to share with NAACLS program directors at large. But a common theme along with all of the items we're talking today, including delivery methods, is a lot of this is made possible by the continual focus and efforts by the board of directors and our review committee members to make sure that our standards remain as flexible as possible, because different programs serving different communities need to have that flexibility to develop partnerships, to find affiliates, and create the best educational experience for their current students. One quick promotionary item before we get into the nuts and bolts is that if you're curious about learning more about other programs and how they're being innovative or just how they tackle the challenges of providing laboratory experience, we can't encourage you enough to become a NAACLS volunteer, especially at the self-study and site visit review level. You really become deeply familiar with how another program executes its processes and remains compliant with the NAACLS standards. So with that, a few major items that we saw from our accredited and approved programs were that the ones who maybe showed up with the most surprising, innovative examples were extremely proactive innovative and creative in their approach to find ways to solve some of the challenges they were experiencing. First thing we identified is the partnerships we saw programs create in order to accomplish their goals. We were surprised that we actually saw the amount of affiliates that were added in within the last year. We know that the challenges that programs can face, even under the best of circumstances, to find affiliate partners, but especially with the added layer, again, challenges of COVID. Some few specific examples, and after this, I'll open it up to Marisa and Dr. Cearlock to comment on, is local universities that provided case simulations and exercises for microbiology students, making partnerships to develop rural hospital laboratory training, and partnerships with regional healthcare providers to develop further opportunities for students. So, Marisa, you pointed out some of these. Was there anything here that really struck you initially?
Well, first of all, going through all of these different innovative ideas was such a joy to see how creative our program directors and program officials are. It was really fascinating, and it was a lot of fun to kind of look through what other people are doing. There was a lot of almost cold calling, it sounded like, people reaching out if you are from a university-based or college-based, community college-based program, reaching out to hospitals, seeing if maybe they weren't willing to host students in the past, but maybe now they are. Conversely, I think a few of the hospital-based programs were reaching out to universities or community colleges as well, even high schools, to try and just develop new partnerships with the intent of increasing enrollment, getting more students in the laboratory science field, and just helping with the massive amount of shortage. So it was really great to see people just being approached. Also, I noticed a few program directors were being approached by hospitals because they wanted to host students, because they know that that's how they can maybe hang on to them and hire them at the end. Overall, just encouraging people to be a part of the solution, in that even as you're talking with officials that are at different hospitals that maybe aren't involved with laboratory education, or universities or colleges that aren't already involved with laboratory education, they're now starting to see that that is important. And I personally reached out to a few of employers of my graduates and just make sure, do you still have a partnership with, the local university, the local hospital? If so, continue that. So I was very encouraged by seeing people kind of getting a little bit more far-reaching.
Dianne, I know I've heard you speak about partnership opportunities in the past within the NAACLS standards. What from the responses kind of struck your interest?
Many, actually, as both of you and Marisa have identified, we had quite a few programs respond to the innovation question, saying that they had sought out new partnerships of one type or another. So there were quite a few, but I thought the first one you have listed on this slide struck me as quite interesting, because I think when we think of seeking, like say, a hospital as a partner for a program, we think of them as taking students, into their lab physically and working with them, on some kind of a clinical internship. This particular program identified a different strategy, which was that they were seeking help from partnerships to help increase the amount and the quality of different simulated exercises, specifically for microbiology in this case. So that was like a bit of a different twist on it, and I thought that was very interesting. The other thing I thought was we did see several of our programs reporting that they were reaching out to more rurally based hospitals for training. And I thought that was very interesting for several reasons. One, I think that there has tended to be a bit of a bias in the greater NAACLS community that larger hospitals and medical centers can provide students with more quality education compared to smaller, rurally placed locations. And not that I thought that or do think that, but I think there's been a little bit of a bias in that respect. And what I thought that the current situation was doing was getting people to reevaluate that a little bit and saying, well, here's an opportunity to expand our partnerships in hospitals in rural locations. It's a different kind of experiential opportunity for our students, but not a lesser one. And they also saw that as being very critical to helping overall in the workforce shortage, because often when you have workforce shortages, the more rurally placed locations are the most affected, the fastest. And yet, we still have populations out there that require good health care. So I thought that was our programs, not only thinking about what might help them and their students, but also what might help the greater community. And I was quite impressed with that.
Great. We'll keep it moving to another thing we noticed was how many grants and scholarships opportunities programs were seeking, and specifically focusing on smaller grants. I think a lot of times whether it's a program or working for a not-for-profit, we tend to see the big home run and try to get that big home run grant or scholarship that could solve all of our issues and all our complications. And what we noticed were a lot of programs maybe going after those smaller little bits and trying to build and stack grants instead of just, again, the one catch-all. Marisa, I know you made notes on what some of these acronyms mean, so I'm going to transition to you.
Yeah, the laboratorians love their acronyms. So is the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And that came through the U.S. Department of Education, having to do with another acronym, CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. So I basically just Googled HERF and kind of figured out what that was related to. So that is an opportunity that people used to purchase new equipment. And then NSH is the National Society for Histology. When I went to their website, I had no idea that they have 8 different categories for scholarships, ranging from $500 to $6,000. So some of it is for the NAACLS programs themselves. Some of it is for students. Some of it is career advancement. They have different categories. And so I was really very excited to see some of those opportunities, because I know histology is finding histotechs is very difficult. And then the last thing was the ASCP educational grants. And they ASCP kind of gave those out slightly differently this year. I think the deadline was in May. They're generally for the student scholarships and the grants. The deadline was mid-May, but people were being notified of their grants through the whole summer and fall. So they kind of staggered how often they were giving those out. So it wasn't just everybody notified June 30th. Just being on the ASCP's or BOC Facebook, I was noticing people were getting their scholarships in June, in July, in August. I got mine in September. So they kind of trickled it out, which was really fantastic. And so a lot of people purchased different instruments for maybe their student lab or something along those lines. And then other things not on this list were just being able to purchase things from their institution, which I think I might be getting ahead of myself in the presentation, but that was what I found out.
Dianne, did you have any other additional reactions to the grant and scholarship innovations?
Just a little. I was impressed by how proactive our programs were over the past year in seeking some of these opportunities. It has been my experience over many years in this field that educators are actually pretty good about making sure their students are aware of various scholarship opportunities and have done very well for their students by doing so. But less so, I think, often for things that would be more directed to the program, which we saw some examples of, including here. So for instance, the first one is listed. This was an opportunity for the program to purchase new equipment through these HERF funds, and of course use it for educational purposes. And then also on the last one on this slide, to upgrade the technology in their student lab. So what this said to me is maybe there's an opportunity as programs go forward to continue their already good work in identifying scholarship opportunities for students, but perhaps try to expand their efforts a little bit into these types of funds that would be more directed to improvement of the program as well. That's the area I think our community has been a little bit lax on. So that's a good sign, I think, that they were moving into these areas.
Okay, so the next thing we see is institutional support. And this can come in a variety of forms. But again, to kind of piggyback on what Dianne was saying about the scholarship and grants, what was noticeable was the reoccurrence of programs starting to advocate for themselves within their own institution and seeing those advocacy efforts paying off. So I'm going to flip it up a little bit, Dianne, and I'm going to have you go first on some of the examples we had on institutional support and what maybe stuck out to you.
Again, Mark, what really stuck out to me was how proactive our programs have been within the last year to do just what you said, to advocate for themselves for their own programs. And I think it's important to remember that, you know, we can't just talk up our programs, our students, our profession out there. It also, you know, behooves us to do it at home. And so we see a number of different examples, as you see here, of where the programs did just that and advocated for their programs within their own home institution to an extent that I think we have not necessarily often seen. You know, this was my experience as a program director, that if you're kind of quiet and you do a great job and you don't ask for additional support, you don't get it. So I mean, I think that it just is a good sign that whenever possible, you need to go after those little opportunities and not forget that some of those opportunities are in our home institutions.
Marisa, what about you?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this. Advocating our profession and our schools is extremely important to me personally, but I also think it's extremely important for the viability of laboratory education in general. So right now, everybody's thinking about COVID. Everybody is thinking about testing. Everybody is thinking about laboratory medicine. And so I think that what I saw in in all the surveys was people getting started on advocating for their own programs. And if you haven't, I strongly urge you to do so, because now is the time that everybody's thinking about lab medicine, your administrators. Now is the time to take advantage. Don't let this pandemic go to waste. Now is the time where you're going to want, you know, if you need equipment, if you need more people, if you need resources, for the most part, administration, that the people that I know and the people that I work with and the people that in my network in Kansas City especially, they're basically saying yes to anything lab. And so if you need more instrumentation, if you need to if you need an education coordinator, I know we have the staffing shortage kind of gives you somewhat limits you, but now's the time to ask for things on your wish list, because a year from now, 2 years from now, we're probably going to go back in the shadows. We're probably going to go back to the basement. So I personally think that we need to get out now while everybody's thinking about lab, and don't, be bold. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst they could say is no, and you're no worse off. So that's kind of my little soapbox, if you will. But then the other thing that I also noticed, with these examples, like the first one especially, I loved that a lot of institutions were figuring out ways to increase access for students, which I know, again, is on another slide. But I liked this one. It kind of, dances between institutional support and access, because there are students who don't have internet at home, or maybe they have internet at home, but they didn't necessarily want to be at home because all their siblings were at home and they couldn't concentrate. So then they could drive to their, parking lot, attend class, take their tests in, a private area. And I thought that was fantastic. That university-wide they were able to do, something along those lines. And then the testing centers, I don't know as much about that. But again, just kind of thinking outside the box of how can you support students who are not physically with you as well. Yeah, that's it.
I think one surprising thing that I noticed, and we started to see some programs talk about this even last year, was the efforts made for checking in with mental health of their students. So Dianne, I'll start with you again about to maybe comment on some of these mental health innovations.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, we did see this. I think this is the first year that I have reviewed the answers from the annual survey of programs and found specific references to the mental health of students and faculty. So, this is, kind of a dawning, I think. And, obviously, I think people have always been concerned about that. But this is the year that it hit the radar enough to show up on our survey. We looked for examples of what they were doing that were more specific in nature, less general. Now, if you look at, for instance, what's on the slide here, there's not a lot that's real specific. So we got the fact that we had monthly mental health, change slides, monthly mental health meetings, that's okay. Other than, was wellness check-ins, that was more specific. Less specific were comments like we made huge efforts to attend to our students' mental health. I wished I had the opportunity to reach out to those programs that were not so specific and get the specifics. And maybe that will be something that NAACLS can do as a content area in the coming days, because clearly mental health of our students, mental health of our faculty, mental health of our clinical laboratory community is so important, and it's not an area of strength for people in our professions as a general rule. We're very science oriented, very technology oriented, and what we see with the annual survey responses this year is there's an acknowledgement of how important these kinds of affective things are, again, for all of us, and an increased intensity of what we're trying to do to alleviate stresses and strains where there are. So that's very general, but I'm hoping that with a little time and a little more investigation, we can actually dig into what our programs did very specifically in this area and be able to report them to our community.
So,
Yeah, I also was very happy to see some of this. Students are also, what I've noticed the last several years is they are very open about their mental health. When I was growing up, I knew nobody that was going to any sort of therapy. Now students it's just part of their conversation. Well, my therapist said blah, blah, blah. And then another student will say, well, my therapist said blah, 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 this, something like that. And so just providing that support because they're talking about it anyways and not shoving that away to the side and making a concerted effort, because the bottom line is we want our students to be successful. And NAACLS has we have our 3 domains. You have to be, you have to have the psychomotor skills, you have to have the cognitive skills, but you also have to have the affective skills. And the affective skills it ties directly into mental health. And so as educators, it's encouraging to see other fellow educators providing a support network for that, making a bigger impact so that our students are successful and so they don't, hopefully it leads to fewer dropouts and just continues throughout their career. The mental health, just talking about that and not just shoving it off to the side, compartmentalizing it, if you will, is good for everyone, I feel.
moving along for mental health access. So we had a specific question this year on the annual survey programs about what NAACLS is, the acronym NAACLS is using as IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. But the answers we're going to see now weren't included in those under that question. Some programs chose to highlight this area in their innovative factors. So while we are looking to mine that vein of information, maybe at a later date, we did want to discuss some of the answers that were provided, as these were places where programs felt that they were innovating. So Marisa, I will start with you on the access content.
Yeah, so access is just making sure students from a variety of backgrounds are able to be supported through any of the challenges that they have. So you can see on this first one, students with disabilities. I know that I went to the Emerging Leaders Management Conference. I attended that virtually last week, and it was, they put closed captioning on it, like, so you could read through. If you were hearing impaired, you could read through what people were saying, or if you just couldn't, quite keep up with what they were saying. So, and I know that last year at CLEC, there was a specific disabilities, how to accommodate different disabilities. Someone had done a talk about that. So it was encouraging to see things like that, as well as stressing how important diversity and inclusion are at their specific institution and developing questions in the interview process. And then the last thing was also just figuring out a way to focus more on multicultural or diversity. This is, again, like Mark said, this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. We're hoping to do something a little bit more concrete or formal, I guess, with sharing how NAACLS programs are using inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And so I'm excited to kind of dig into that a little bit more. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg because it was a separate annual survey question, but it's certainly something that NAACLS will be emphasizing. Our board of directors has talked about making sure that the IDEA is emphasized in our program. So it's good to see that it's already kind of been starting. There's ASCLS and ASCP, our professional organizations in the laboratory, have really kind of started with that. So I'm excited to see how NAACLS will continue on.
Diane, and I think oh, no, go ahead. We can go to research later. I thought we had another page for this. Diane, did you have any comments on the access answers?
I think I'm just going to say that I am in complete agreement with what Marisa pointed out about access and the responses on our survey. And just leave it at that. It is an area that really it's developing now, and I think it's developing fast. Not just at NAACLS, but across the programs of NAACLS. Like Marisa said, there was a couple of sessions at last year's CLEC that dealt upon it. And it was very interesting to see that that those were very well attended. People were very interested in that area.
Okay, our last section is research. And while we admittedly didn't see a lot of people targeting research as the ways they innovated, the quote that we have in bold here stuck out to both Marisa and Dr. Cearlock, and that's something we may want to share with more programs as a whole. And that quote is, "Research enhances both academic success and critical thinking." So Diane, I'll start with you. Here are some examples of how some programs either chose to implement research in and of itself, or giving their students the opportunity to present research.
Thank you, Mark. People who know me probably have heard me say before that a quote that particularly struck me years ago, and I find to be still true today, is that we will not control our profession until we control the research about our profession, which we are not doing at this time. And so, there is so much room then for expansion of what we do relative to research as educators. You have a couple of examples listed here of programs that were trying to dig into this a little bit more. And, to me, this just made so much sense in both cases, because they were making it appropriate and specific for their own location and their own program. And therefore not trying to, recreate an NIH grant or something like that, but making it perhaps smaller scale and very appropriate for the particular community. I think we would do very well if our educators could continue to do this. I have heard often that undergraduate students are not capable of conducting research or understanding research scientific papers. I disagree with both of those tenets. So I guess I'm on my soapbox now, but this is an area that I really do hope that our very creative educators can perhaps expand upon in the future.
Marisa?
Yeah, I just love the top bullet point because it's focusing on a different part of microbiology specifically. It's not just the human microbiology that we're thinking of. It's just how everything goes into public health and environmental, like all of that. This was really fascinating. It gave us a little bit of a twist on the on a regular clinical microbiology course that you have in any of the, if you're doing MLT or MLS. I didn't really take a whole lot of courses that focused on wildlife specifically. So I found this to be just giving students a little bit different of the microbiology, specifically with regards to the pandemic and potentially how that started, the virus from that perspective. I just found it to be very fascinating. And the second one, I want students to talk in public in the program. And so I love that they kind of merged the research piece of it and also talking, having this public speaking engagement. I think just putting those together is a good skill to have as a laboratorian, being able to talk, figure out how to speak to your audience, and in a scientific manner. And I think these were the only two research things, but they were very strong. I was very excited about them.
So now we're shifting to our general Q&A. As a reminder, or if this is your first time, the Q&A can apply to any NAACLS standards or policies at all. It can be about this presentation, or if you're working on a self-study and have a question, whatever it may be. We'll take questions through the text box, which you have access to, or if you raise your hand, we'll grant you the access to talk and you can ask your question, or if you have a comment over Zoom itself. Before we dig into the questions, just a quick plug for our DLPs, which stands for Discipline Lead People. They are members of our review committees. Their main expertise is standard interpretation. So if you have a question about a standard or things of that nature, these are the people to ask. Their information's on the website. If you have questions about policy and procedure, that's when you email staff. If you're not sure where it falls, please email staff first. We're the ones paid. A quick note about DLPs is that while they're more than happy to talk about standard interpretation and assist you with that, they're not here to consult on, hey, I have a progress report. What do you think? Or I'm putting together my application packet. Can we give it a quick once over for me? That kind of falls into conflict of interest because these are a part of the committees that have final decision over those kinds of things. But if you have broader, more general questions about the standards, these are the people to reach out to. One quick process note is we are approaching our committee meetings in a few weeks. Generally at our committee meetings, we shift discipline leads. So we'll update those on the website when we're ready. So if you go to the program director as part of the website, you can get the email addresses to all these people or their the new appointees who will then be DLPs. So with that, are there any questions among the audience? While we're waiting, I will quickly mention is if there are areas of these trends or these things that we took of notice in the annual survey programs that you maybe want more information on, more practicalities on, we're always looking for content ideas. So you can email me at mspence@naacls.org. If I start noticing that there are popular themes, we can start getting to work on that. Give it a couple more moments. Not seeing anything right now.
I would just take this moment to reiterate what Mark said a little earlier, right at the beginning, and that is that we chose for today not to focus on the many innovative strategies that our programs used in terms of education delivery itself, for the most part. And so I want to make it clear to everyone that the majority of the comments we got for innovation were of that type. And I felt, though, that educators had actually been doing a great job over the past year and a half of communicating with each other about many of these ideas. And so for today, we tried to focus on areas that were, not perhaps quite as obvious as the education delivery particulars that we've been hearing about for almost 2 years now. So it's not that they weren't there, they were there. And I'm sure you know already about many of the things people have been doing. A lot of virtual education, a lot of instructional technology, assisted education, a lot of changing of schedules, shortening rotations, doing more simulation, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make sure you understand that those were the majority of the responses, and they may make a good content area for some kind of a future communication.
Doesn't look like there's any questions. So I do want to quickly, as I'm scrolling through our attendees, I see committee members and even a committee chair. So just a quick thank you to all our volunteers. Marisa is a volunteer. So thank you. This is a volunteer-driven organization, especially now kind of in the depths of winter when nothing seems easy. It's worth mentioning how much we do appreciate the time and efforts that NAACLS volunteers give to the organization. So we're all busy. So unless we get a question in like 10 seconds, I think we'll go ahead and end this call. Wait a minute, something moved. Not that. No, it looks like so. Yeah, we'll end the call. Our next Dr. NAACLS, we just put up on the NAACLS News. I don't remember the dates off the top of my head, so I'm not going to confuse everybody, but please go to naclsnews.org for that. It's regarding the site visit, because we're entering site visit season. So we're going to have a couple of seasoned, both in-person site visitors and virtual site visitors to kind of talk about tips of the trade and take questions regarding that and any other thing.